Of course, one of the interesting and critical tensions in thinking about leaders and leadership for rural areas, and I've situated this one in terms of education, but applies more broadly, is this dynamic between education and other services that are designed to keep people local, if you like, for staying, or for leaving, or indeed for choice, for both. And one of the things I'm particularly interested in is how do we construct approaches to leadership and train leaders both in the service sector and in the business sector and in the local government sector and in health services and so on, so they understand these sorts of tensions between local, if you like, leaving, going, the mobility dimensions, and also choice to move between those. I think the other thing that's come across just listening to, you wouldn't put it like this, but a message I want to leave with you today, or get you to think about a bit as a leader in a community, a business leader or whatever, is to understand deeply that place actually matters. I think when we heard about the Flurio tourism person, and I've forgotten your name, Brenda?
Miranda.
Yeah, Miranda. Well, I know you come from Canada and not America. You made that point pretty powerfully. So I've got that one, is that in fact place does matter as a business, and place matters as education. Place matters in terms of leadership. And this guy, David Grunwald, if you want a long academic read that's lucidly written, I advise you to read him, otherwise move on to something else. But what he talks about is how profoundly pedagogical place is. It's an informing thing. It's not a thing to be dismissed lightly. And it teaches us about how the world works. I mean, our Indigenous colleagues who have gone now, but you know, how profound it is to Indigenous communities' place. And I think one of the things that distinguishes leadership and leaders in rural contexts is their advocacy of place and how significant place is in framing what it is they do and how they see the world. As indeed are stories and relationships. It's become a little unfashionable to use words like narrative-based leadership or relationship-based leadership. We need some bigger sounding words like strategy, strategic leadership, and financial leadership and political leadership. I guess a raw fact of life is that life's journey is facilitated and nurtured by stories, right? We are a storytelling people. And narrative is critical. And each of your businesses, each of your locations, each of your contexts, I just challenge you to think about leadership in terms of stories as well as relationships. And of course, just to add to the issue of place, if you're interested in a kind of looking at another dimension to leadership, which Tacey writes about, which is about how landscape and place nurture kind of a spiritual dimension. I don't mean in I believe God, in that sense of spiritual. What I'm meaning is something other than that which we articulate and verbalise, but forms a powerful sense of connection and meaning and shapes how we think about things. This is what do you call it? What do you call this? A conceptualisation of leadership. I'm stuck for a word. A diagram. No, it's more than a diagram. It's a conceptual thing. On a serious note, one of the interesting things I think which you might want to think about is being a small business leader, or indeed being a service provider, how you navigate and negotiate being a leader living in rural contexts. Now, the reason I emphasise this is because rural contexts themselves have a number of characteristics. I haven't put them on this PowerPoint, I probably should have, but to just mention a couple. Typically, it's smaller population centres, higher reliance on informal communication, right? And sometimes less distance between our clients than we might otherwise experience in a larger population centre. That's code for if you screw it up, everybody knows about it and you're going to be reminded of it lots of times. And in education sense, when we send young teachers out to country communities, some of them spend a hell of a lot of social capital the first night they're in the pub when they get a bit talkative and say something to someone that turns out later on not to be overly wise. And one of the real challenges of leadership, whether it's in the business or service sector or government sector or whatever, within a rural community where you have small population centre, large distances, high reliance on informal communication, sometimes quite strongly gendered relationships. And perhaps it's important for me to say, and I'm sure you know this, but historically women have lifted a very heavy burden in terms of a very heavy load in terms of leadership and service provision and keeping things going in rural areas. And if you want one figure, for example, at the height of the drought, and it's still pretty much the case, in many of our rural communities, women earn significant proportions of the off-farm income, up to 50% and greater. And if it wasn't for that, we'd have further significant problems with our agricultural and our primary industry sector. But coming back to this, you may adapt this for your own context, but I developed this for both educational leaders and teachers to think of their life, and all of this is, in a sense, a set of approximations, but it's trying to say, you know, you have your professional domain, you are the teacher, you are the business manager, you are the regional director, CEO of Region Australia, whatever. So you've got your professional domain, your personal domain, your family, you know, your friends kind of context, and then you in the public domain. And one of the complexities around being a leader in a rural context, because in many instances you don't have the escape to anonymity. To put it crudely, I suppose, or put it pointedly, when I was principal of Ceduna Area School, when I went home at night, everybody knew where I went, everybody knew what I bought down the shop, everybody knew. Even when I went out fishing, a boat pulled up alongside one day and I thought they were going to talk about, are you getting any fish? And what do you know? Look, I got an issue, John, I need to talk to you about my kid at school. And I thought, well, there just really is nowhere to escape. Other than perhaps trying scuba diving, and I guess they would have put aqualungs on or something. But the point here being is the sensitivity and complexities of traversing these contexts and others in such a way that your, if you like, your professional expertise and professional persona and your leadership enables you to do what is required, sometimes to lift the heavy burden or to say the difficult thing or to make the hard judgment and still operate effectively in the community. I said a minute ago the numbers, I'm not going to elaborate on those, I'll just leave it there for you if you want to take a copy of the PowerPoint. But they are profoundly big and profoundly significant, profoundly. And if our Chinese colleagues were here, last year I did a presentation on sustainability to when Flinders met with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And after my presentation, the leader of the group came up and said, can we have a chat? I'd like to sort of kind of pick your brain, so to speak. And he said one of the big challenges we've got is about 625 million people moving out of rural China over the next 25 to 30 years into cities, over 150 cities, I think, off the top of my head of 5 million or more. And I go, right. Or an Indian student of mine, a doctor, we were having a seminar in leadership and management in rural context, and his opening line went something like this: my seminar today is, the context for it is rural India, where 720 million people live in over 500,000 villages, most of whom which don't have running water or electricity. And I go, can we just have that again? You know, the scale, the dimension, incredible and significant. And sometimes when we're a leader in a small community, we can become disconnected. And I'm not sharing this data with you to sort of kind of paralyse you, but I think it does put in, it's important contextually for us. And sort of a bit of the why in terms of what you're doing and how important rural communities are. As I've said originally, and I'm not going to labour it too much, it's because in fact, if we do not nurture rural communities, if they are not vibrant and productive, if they don't have the suite of human services and the commercial services and the vibrancy of a diverse age population, and we do much more creative things in our leadership role to speak up and advocate for youth retention or youth return into rural communities, right, so that they in turn become the leaders of the future, then we are really writing ourselves, I think, a prescription for a pretty bleak future. And as I've said already, the kind of tension we have, I think, is It's kind of three-dimensional, 3 or 4 elements to it. Broadly speaking, more people moving out of rural communities than going back. Particularly this applies to youth, and there's a gendered dimension to that. More young women moving out more than young men. That creates its own issues. We've got population growth both globally and nationally. We've got increasing demand for the basics of life, food, water, energy. It's estimated by 2050, even if we cut down on waste, and we currently waste about 30% of our food in the Western world, we're going to need 70% more food, particularly as people migrate to higher protein-based diets. So it's critically important that we think about the role of leadership and indeed what role we can play to ensure, as far as possible, that the rural communities we're associated with are indeed vibrant and productive.